Hello, everybody. Very happy to be speaking with you this evening, this very cold evening, on the subject of psilocybin and some of my recent journeys, particularly as they pertain to an entity that is often referred to as the Mantis. I have had a couple of rather engaging conversations with this entity, and I wanted to share for you my experience. This is strictly for entertainment purposes. I truly don't know what any of this means, if anything, but in the wake of what occurred, I felt the desire to go see if there was any existing information on such a phenomenon, and it was rather scant, though it does exist, so I thought I might supply some. This all started back in, I believe it was 2019, over the course of the summer, and I ingested a heroic dose of psilocybin. I believe it's 5 grams, 5 milligrams, whatever. But as a devotee of the lectures by Terence McKenna, whose engaging lectures you can find interspersed throughout YouTube if you're so curious, I knew that that was what was known as the heroic dose, and he recommended taking it in silent darkness. I've heard about some people administering what I and some other people refer to as these plant medicines when they were, say, sitting down to watch Beetlejuice at a party, which seems like a waste of medicine, if you ask me. But I waited until the house was empty and sundown was occurring, and I consumed the psilocybin, and I waited. And I had learned by this time that the best approach is to avoid resistance, because you have no control, essentially. And when you resist, good things don't tend to occur. You sense the futility of what's occurring. You realize that you've got hours left within the trip. And it's best if you simply throw your hands up as if you were on a roller coaster and just observe, make the most of it. So I closed my eyes and I meditated and I waited. I'm going to provide you with some context as we lead up to the mantis creature, so you can hopefully you'll identify with some of this or register with something. And round about the 45-minute mark, a vision appeared. And it was the vision of an undead man, a zombie rather. And I was suddenly filled with a sense of unease, as you would be if this face was suddenly staring at you and you couldn't get that image out of your mind. Already at that point, it's as if I was seeing it with open eyes. And it wouldn't go away. It was just right there, like right there within my territorial bubble, and I felt very uncomfortable with this, but I chose not to resist, and I just stared right back. And Terence McKenna often talks about how the psilocybin as an intelligence will delve into your psyche and try to find intriguing bits, say psychoses, and either recalibrate this for you or take it from you. So there have been people who talk about losing their stutter after one dose of psilocybin, or soldiers who have PTSD undergo psilocybin therapy. This is becoming far more common throughout this nation of ours. And I saw this zombie face, and as I'm looking at it, I realized that this was most likely related to when I saw Night of the Living Dead when I was 9 years old. I was a fresh 9-year-old. I'd been 9 for about a month. And I had been raised on all the 1980s films that could be pretty dark, but was relatively sheltered. And they didn't have IMDb parents back then, so you couldn't preview a film and know what was contained within it. Night of the Living Dead is not rated. It looked like a silly black and white B horror movie that we could all sit down as a family and enjoy. How mistaken we were. I don't know if you've ever seen that film, and it's truly amazing what they did with a minuscule budget and the limited practical effects they had at hand, but it's basically a film about unbridled sadism. It's a film about hopelessness. It is a film about what occurs in the absence of a moral universe. Sorry, this thing's going to keep shutting down, and it'll freeze up on me when I do. Are we there again? Yeah. Now, it's not celebrating the absence of a moral universe like I feel Rob Zombie's movies are. I'm not a fan of his films, and that's a reason. He wouldn't get to make films unless he had the privilege of living in a moral universe. It didn't revel in it, but Night of the Living Dead essentially puts people in a perilous position where they have to overcome a set of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and gradually hope dissipates until every last person you're rooting for dies a horrible death. Included within the film is a scene whereby a young woman, a tween-age girl, has been bitten by a zombie, doesn't want to die, is scared of dying, then dies, comes back from the dead, kills her own mother maliciously with, I believe, is a gardening tool, and then eats her corpse. This is after she's eating her own father. So all of this just blew my mind in terms of ever being a possibility, to ever consider that mode or notion of hopelessness, to ever consider such horrible things as killing your own mother and then devouring her corpse. The notion that the people you love and trust the most could die horribly in front of you and then come back to life and kill you. Really, really took me, threw me for a loop. And I believe the experience, in terms of the moral universe I was trying to believe in at the time, traumatized me. I don't believe a 9-year-old child necessarily should be watching Night of the Living Dead. I certainly didn't know what to do with it, and I left the light on for several years. That was my reaction. You might think it's a bit extreme, but I had trouble falling asleep in the dark and would often wake up with nightmares of zombies breaking into my home and hearing the screams of my loved ones downstairs and then knowing that they were going to be coming for me as the undead. So here I am in the midst of this psilocybin journey, and I have this zombie staring at me in the face. And gradually it dissipated. And I had attempted to read about zombie mythology over the years, and also to come up with my own conclusions about why it had affected me so. One of them being the notion that the zombie mythos and franchises are essentially an examination of society itself and the people that you cannot reason with. They have their convictions and they will take you down and kill you, be they people on either sides of the political spectrum who are at their most extreme in terms of their beliefs, or just people who are convinced they're doing the right thing when they're committing atrocities. But I always felt a strict and close attachment with that initial fear and disruption of my understanding of what was safety and what was hope, what was morality. Until that night. I attest to you that that night, that was taken away from me and it has never returned. And that was a wonderful experience. Losing that was wonderful. And Terrence McKenna talks about how the psilocybin will pinpoint say, we'll take that, we can probably do more with that than you can, whatever the we happens to be, because it feels very much like its own individual intelligence, and I'll talk a little more about that moving forward. So that felt sort of like the secret password. That was the initiation. That meant that I had gained access into the world. And I laid back, and the sun had completely gone down, and it was dark in the room. I had a lava lamp on in the corner. And I closed my eyes, and I gradually began to see what looked like something you'd see out of a Hayao Miyazaki film. It was this, I call it the lily pad palisade. It was like these glowing formations, little tiny pockets of land that looked like lily pads that were suspended on almost like a beanstalk, and they were stretching, presumably up into infinity. I could see this. And what was really surprising was, with the light on in the room, it seemed like I saw a figment of it with my eyes open, which I had never experienced before. And what I knew about this place was that I felt very safe, and that it was a really beautiful place. And I felt a presence. It was a voice. I'd felt the presence and a voice from the very first time I took psilocybin. It was a very reassuring voice the first time, telling me that everything was going to be okay despite the atrocities of life, including genocide, rape, and I said, I don't understand that. And said, well, I'm sorry, but you're so stupid. I could explain this to you for 1,000,000 years and you'd never understand. So just take my word for it. And I threw my head back and I laughed for about 8 hours while calling random members of my family and telling them how much I loved them. So to hear a voice in this moment did not surprise me. And I also was able to pick up on a gender for the entity. It had a masculine energy and it was very paternal and it was comforting. And it stated to me essentially that you're going to hear the heater go on and off, that this place was safe and I could stay here the entire time if I wished. While these gateways were open, this is where I could remain if I so chose. I could also go further. And I guess the experience is revealing because it always told me that if there is another door, I will go through it. Sometimes to my detriment, but I will go through that door. It's eternal curiosity, the seeker. And the paternal voice said, well, that's perfectly fine, but there's no need to have the light on. If you're going to go further, basically it was telling me you have to trust it. This is not about petty insecurities or grievances or notions of security. Just turn the light off and go. So I did, and I was filled with glee. I was so excited because I had no idea what was going to happen next. Where was I going to go? And though what happened over the course of the next several hours is a bit spotty in places, I proceeded to be taken on a journey by a series of guides, many of which were animalistic in nature. And it seemed like they were passing me along. It was almost like going through, I hate to compare it to this, but like a bureaucratic chain of events or positions which can take you where you wish to go. This is the department at which you want to reach. And my aim and ambition was to go as high as I could possibly go and as far as I could possibly go. Essentially, what's behind all of this, I have to know and I want to see. So I came prepared with a series of questions, and one of them was, what happens when we die? An entity whose gender did not happen to make itself manifest to me sort of took me, and we seemed to be almost like holding hands and hovering above what I can only describe as a coliseum of souls. It was a very calm, beautiful place. And it was this domed building that pulsated and glowed and emanated. And there were these little orbs, little circles that did the same. And they all seemed very individual, and they all seemed very calm and at peace. And it looked like a very beautiful place. And this is where it gets peculiar. I asked it about my grandmother who had recently died. I said I'd like to see her if I could. And it showed me a vision of an insect. Now the thing is, you're not going to necessarily see what you want. What's so intriguing about the substance is that oftentimes what you see is so counterintuitive. The very nature of discovery is the counterintuitive, otherwise it wouldn't be a discovery. And we've been proven wrong throughout history so many times, which is how we've learned, hey, this earth is actually revolving around the sun and so forth. So I was shown an insect, didn't know what to do with that, looked akin to a housefly, almost like through infrared. And then I was told, you're going to meet her on the other side before she arrives. She was already dead, and I thought, how is that? And this essence, this intelligence was essentially describing to me that she had been so resistant throughout the process of her dying that she was resisting everything she was experiencing and would not be able to actually make her way to whatever comes after until I had already gone through this life process and had died, and I would greet her on this other side, and she would essentially say, what the hell are you doing here? It seemed amusing to me. But that was true all throughout the time that she was in hospice. She would say, I don't want to go into those rooms. And she actually got out of hospice. This happens with about 10% of people who go in, to where she recovered and her faculties returned. She was terribly depressed, and there wasn't really much left for her to do in her life, so there wasn't really too much reason to stick around. But she was better and out of that bed for 2 months or so. I asked to see where my dog was, my beloved childhood dog, and there was a slit in a wall that was glowing, and this essence wouldn't take me in there, but it said, in there. And it looked like a beautiful place. It was just peace emanating from there. I thought, that's very nice. Now, what I've seen several times while consuming psilocybin is the orbs themselves, these little circular lights, which could be mushroom spores, because spores can survive in the vacuum of space. Mushrooms are hardy, resilient properties. And it could just be a means of ingesting it and therefore seeing its chemical makeup, which in and of itself would be astounding. But the more that I've encountered these these lights, these like floating lights, the more I think of them as souls. And it was intriguing. I went to see The Boy and the Heron recently, the Hayao Miyazaki film, and he has a whole section about that, of these circular white orbs floating up into space. And that's very much akin to what I experienced, particularly that evening, because as I was in the grips of another guide, it kept showing me the souls floating upward. I thought that's very interesting. And it basically kept telling me, this is good, this is bad, which seems to make sense. This is good, this is bad. We don't want the souls to descend. We don't want the souls to be flushed away. We want the souls to ascend. This is progress, and this is the antithesis. And I made it show me many times, because even the simplistic nature of that positive versus negative didn't entirely make sense to me. It was sort of like, okay, and where are we going with this? Now, I remember 3 more guides before making my way to the Mantis. One of the guides consisted of a duo of what appeared to be twins who were feminine in nature, and struck me as, I don't want to say malevolent, but certainly made fun of me, and were, looked down on me and were condescending. I don't know that they were actually trying to hurt my feelings, but they were quite condescending. And at one point, when I was challenging them, I basically heard them saying, "Ooh, he's feisty." Just felt condescending. And I was passed off to this owl-like creature who gripped me in its talons and flew me over a vast expanse. I could feel all of this and see all of this, again, with my eyes wide open. I would close my eyes tight and I would see all this. I would open my eyes and I was still seeing everything, like being in a dreaming state while awake. I was flown over this vast expanse, and I got the distinct impression that I was a nuisance to this owl. It wasn't speaking to me. It didn't seem... It was doing its job, but felt beleaguered. At one point, I was in the grip of its talons, and it seemed to be squeezing my torso. My stomach constricted, and I was holding my breath for long periods of time, and breathing in a way that felt counterintuitive and at the same time perfectly natural. In hindsight, I believe that what was occurring was that the mushroom substance was instructing me on how to initiate Kundalini breathing so that I could release the dimethyltryptamine in my brain. It seemed like this was the case. The breathing went on for the longest time. It seemed to have a pattern. It was intense. It involved a great deal of breathing in as deep as I could and holding it in a very specific way, and adopting bodily postures and positions I had never even conceived of adopting, let alone ever been shown were possible. In the throes of this, the owl entity disappeared, or dropped me off and sent me on its way, and went on its way. And at that point, the outline of a ram-like figure appeared that looked, let's say, Egyptian in nature, something you might see in ancient hieroglyphics. And this creature communed with me in a way that I can only describe as an exchange. This is where it gets weird, because I don't want to say I had sex with some sort of ram god, but it felt like an intimate exchange. There was not the sensation of penetration so much as a feeling that my body was being investigated in a way that felt like a penetration of mind, a penetration of essence, perhaps. And I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2005, and the ram-like creature was telling me that began when you were in middle school and you experienced a great deal of bullying and you were very stressed out. Okay. So I'm just rolling with this, folks, because you don't resist. So I'm like, okay, we're kind of having sex with a ram now, and let's see where this goes. And I will say that as a straight cisgendered white male, It was the closest I will ever have to the experiential sex that women probably undergo all the time. Sex for a man is an act of committing, as we all know. I don't know that I need to explain the mechanics to the likes of you, but for a woman it's experiential in a way I can only fathom. Women tend to close their eyes more often when they're having sex. It's because they're more attuned with their bodies and what is happening to them as opposed to what they are doing to someone else, at least in terms of straight sex, the sex I've encountered. So, in hindsight, I took this to mean that I was to undergo an initiation which would place me in the realm of the feminine so that I could meet the Mantis. So I wanted to see who was behind it all, and I was raised in the Lutheran church. I'd go to church on Good Friday, and I remember one year they had us hammering nails into a cross, and I almost walked out of there. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to join in on whatever that was because I felt such a reverence for Christ growing up. And now I see Christ more as an ideal. Christ is actually a regurgitated mythos from many other belief systems that came before, which also included the birth of a virgin, someone who was deemed sacred by someone who was later beheaded, and someone who was, crucified and went and resurrected. And if you believe that the Christ thing is just a coincidence and that's actually real, the real one, then you'll believe almost anything. I think more often than not, it's just really a serviceable ideal and a form of crowd control in our society. And sadly, I do believe our society needs to be controlled to a certain extent, given the evil that lurks within the hearts of many, if they're provided the permission to act upon it. But if that ideal works for you, that's fine. I don't think you can expect anyone else to take it seriously. But work your belief systems however you so choose. But to me, it's just a myth and an ideal. But given that I had already concluded that it was a myth and an ideal, an inspiring story, fictional story, I expected to see a man, right? That's what I had been indoctrinated to believe. God the Father, the highest form of authority, is a man. Now, this is not to say that I met the highest form of authority, but I want you to know that I went through a series of experiences that were pretty extensive. And if the Mantis is not the highest form of authority, then I guess I got to work on my Kundalini breathing. In any event, I encounter a feminine entity. And this feminine entity has a face that looks like a mantis. I started thinking about people who would just talk about being abducted by aliens and being probed and all that. And I was like, well, here I am. And maybe they're just in fields and started eating the mushrooms and then had an experience where some creature came up and investigated their ulcerative colitis. And then suddenly they're seeing this alien-like looking creature. Aliens are often seen as a mantis-looking, the traditional notion of the Roswellian alien and so forth. So I'm looking at this mantis creature and sensing it entirely as a feminine entity, and we begin to embark upon a conversation. A conversation about the nature of everything. I asked her, what is this all about? What are you? What is this, and what is it all leading toward? And I was provided with a vision of what looked like a tardigrade in outer space. And my understanding is that tardigrades, much like mushroom spores, can also survive in the vacuum of space. And this looked like a living being, very akin to a tardigrade, but I think without the little legs. And it was floating through space, and it was alive. So it's like breathing in space. And the mantis explained to me that it was to protect the souls. This is good. This is bad. And I saw the souls, and they were beautiful. Little lights, and this being that could traverse the vast reaches of space protected the souls. I said, is this what you are? And she said, this is what we want. And I was suddenly filled with apprehension And if anything akin to resistance during this experience, it was at that moment. What I sensed and what was revealed to me in that state was that we are all essentially existing as fodder to work towards and build this device so that we can protect souls, whatever souls are. If souls can be scientifically quantified, measured, contained, and protected, that is what this does, this being. And we are working towards it. And I was shown the notion of the internet and how the internet works very much like a hive mind, perhaps as a means of accessing the collective consciousness that Jung alluded to so much in the near future. Who knows? I'm still trying to make sense out of all of this. But this is what we want. And I said something akin to, like, what do you mean what you want? Like, you pluck this out of a catalog and we're supposed to build this for you? I got to go to work every day. There's people in I don't think I said this at the time, but it's a worthwhile point. There are people in cocoa and cobalt mines in the Democratic Republic of the Congo who know nothing but suffering from the day they're born until the day they die of malnutrition and exhaustion at the age of 14. And you're telling me this is just so we can all work through this experience, whatever it is, with all the devastation, with all the trials and tribulations, so that eventually, through all our mistakes, through all our errors, through all our suffering, through all our deaths, you can eventually have this. And the Mantis's response was essentially, you got a problem with that? Now, far be it from me to argue with a strange entity who I never anticipated encountering. But I felt the need to vocalize, since we were all being open with one another, that yes, indeed, I had a problem with that. I said, essentially what we are to you what the slaves were to building the pyramids. It's like, I remember Quentin Tarantino talking about how when people take animals and kill them in their films, he's like, that animal doesn't know your film exists, nor does it care. You don't have the right to take this creature's life simply for what you consider to be your art or your craft. And people are dying and suffering and confused and longing and looking and yearning and desperate. And if it's all for this thing in the sky that could be ages away from my comprehension, I'll be long dead by the time that thing's floating around, I take umbrage with that. And I told her so. And at that moment, she walked me through it a few more times, to her credit. She was generous in saying, well, walk me through this again. Good, bad. Yeah, I'm with you. Think floating through space, think protect the souls. Okay. And I still was resistant to this arrangement. At that point, or at some point rather, this is probably about hour 6 or 7, there was a transition within the conversation where it seemed as though the Mantis was saying, if you have any doubts about where you stand and who's in control of all of this, and for about the next 30 minutes to an hour, I was flopping around on the floor like a fish and speaking in tongues. And it was like a marionette. Like I felt the strings and just my body contorting in weird ways and saying all sorts of crazy things. And the speech was able to flow effortlessly. It wasn't as though I had to think about what I was about to say. It just flowed effortlessly as if this was an actual language that I was fluent within. And it seemed to have properties that I would revisit. It was speaking through me, and it was really extraordinary. It didn't feel like demonic possession, though I think if you were to say that to your average Christian, that's what they would conclude. It's like, no, it wasn't like that at all. It was just sort of like a demonstration. If you see those, like, I think there were Japanese scientists who could hook up a battery to a bug and run it like a pacemaker and make its legs go. Like, we can do this for days. I'm like, well, I'm sure the bug does not enjoy that. But I felt actually terribly sorry for that insect. However, That was my experience. And it wasn't until I finally conceded and said, okay, I get it. That you have this power. That it let go in a way that felt very gentle, and I was returned to a state of normalcy, and the trip ended. I gotta say, I found it very difficult to return to my daily life after such an experience, and very difficult to take this experience and parlay it into anything else I was expected to do, like go get groceries or work a job or just have a regular conversation about something as mundane as politics with another human being. Nevertheless, I remembered every last aspect about it, or a tremendous amount, the vast majority, and journaled about it, and gave it a great deal of thought. So, fast forward a couple years to recently, relatively recently, and I tried an experiment where you take psilocybin mushrooms and you put them in lemon juice for half an hour, let them soak. I just squeezed actual lemons, let it soak, and it's supposed to intensify the trip and last much quicker. So instead of an 8-hour trip, it's a 2-hour trip. Instead of getting to the apex around hour 4 through 6, you're there within maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. And this was around Christmas time. And I start seeing all this psychedelic imagery with my eyes closed. And a lot of it was Christmas-oriented in nature, which at first was intriguing. But at the same time, I thought, why am I seeing Christmas imagery? What is Christmas but just an amalgam of various different belief systems, some of them rooted in paganism, some of them rooted in capitalism, some of them rooted in Christianity, all just thrown together. It's all very nonsensical. Christmas is nonsensical. It's nonsense. It's just nonsense. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy yourself, but it's basic nonsense. It's good to have some form of ritual at the end of the year, but it's a ridiculous, ridiculous time. So why am I seeing this if it's just a human fabrication and I'm actually communing with an ancient form of intelligence? I remember Terence McKenna talking about how sometimes you have to say, what is this chicken shit nonsense? Can we all dispense with this and just get to the heart of the matter? And that's what I had to do. Didn't take long, but I found myself like peeling through all these psychedelic Christmas decorations, and I was in this house, and I was climbing my way up through the attic. And the attic was filled with Christmas lights. It was all very beautiful, but I went to the roof, and I was suddenly perched atop a mountain looking down on a valley at night. So the roof was like a hill slope coupling as a roof. Very strange. And I look over, and I see this creature that's covered in masks. And they were like Christmas masks, Santa mask, plastic, crappy, vintage, creepy-looking Santa mask. And I went over and I took it off. I was like, kind of like, stop that. This is ridiculous. We're here to get serious. I came here for an experience. I can look at Christmas decorations anytime I want. I came here for something truly honest and real. And there was another mask underneath, and I had to take that off. And I just started taking off all these masks. And underneath was the side profile or shadow profile of a mantis-like creature. And I sensed that it was the same creature I had witnessed and experienced previously. And our encounter had not been very pleasant, though I had tremendous respect for this entity. And so I, kind of took it real easy, like, how's it going? How you doing? And she seemed very sad. Like I sensed a sadness from her. And this is where it gets really intriguing. She seemed to say to me, the last time we spoke, you were so resistant to everything I was saying. But do you see what I have to work with? As if to say, do you see that at this time of year, people all over the world are worshiping a man who never existed? And if they were to look upon me, they would recoil in horror and probably try to drop an atom bomb on me. That at this time of year, they take an amalgam of ridiculous means to boost the economy and try to make it seem like it, and try to tell people to stop exercising their critical thinking skills and just have faith. Do you see what I have to work with? And I saw floating past like emanations of the souls, the spores, the souls, the lights, the orbs, and they were beautiful. And I sensed that this entity was a being of tremendous import, a celestial being that was, in effect, holding this dimension together. That she felt a tremendous sense of responsibility toward this dimension and was overseeing it and holding it in place, and had been since its inception. And as a result, had established a relationship with every existing soul during that time. I sensed, counterintuitively and much to my chagrin, because I'd like to think we get to go around once and then we're fucking done. Sorry for the expletive, but that we're done, because this stuff gets exhausting sometimes. It really does. That no, in fact, our bodies are vessels for souls, and that our souls remain intact, and that we continue through various bodies, forms, creatures, but the soul, the information of that soul that is collected through the experience of the vessel, is what is integral. And that, much as, say, like Daniel Pinchbeck once suggested, that the universe comes into a state of awareness of itself through each existing creature, being, the collective consciousness, right? And she had established a relationship with every soul, and she felt attached to every soul, as you would to, as I do to my childhood dog, as you would to like something you hold so dear. She had a relationship with every existing soul. And this thing cuts out of me all the time. We're getting to the nitty-gritty of this here. And she was dying. And our dimension was in the process of dying. Now, in our feeble human lifetime, that could mean hundreds of millions of years. But however long this dimension has been in place, she was now entering into a period of concern, much as you would when you start writing your will, or when you're ailing, or when you realize, oh, I'm not going to get better from this. The trick knee isn't going to heal. I can't get around like I used to. It's coming. I need to prepare. And I felt, whereas before I felt resistance and resentment, as one would, petulantly and with recalcitrance toward an authority figure, this time I felt a tremendous amount of sympathy. With that degree of responsibility and that relationship with every existing soul, while I'm debating the existence of my soul. Imagine having a relationship with every existing soul and holding everyone as precious. And she wanted to prepare. She wanted to protect those souls. That we, as souls, are all precious to her. Who, call it what you like, I now refer to as Mother Mantis, because that's the closest I've ever had to actually encountering a supreme being. So I felt a tremendous amount of sympathy, shed some tears, and it seemed very difficult to see what I have to work with. This earth of dog eat dog and kill to survive and consume and fight and compete and denigrate and humiliate anyone for being remotely different from you. Do you see what I have to work with? And at this time of year, they worship a man who never even existed. And she felt very alone, but still felt very responsible towards the souls. So this trip lasted a very short period of time. But as it was ending, I asked to see all of her, because I could sort of see like the side of her face, and the first time I saw her, I saw the front of her face. There had been a very brief period of what felt like Kundalini breathing this time as well, but it was very brief. And she sort of pulled back the veil, and I saw her insectoid legs, which were like very large, Terrence McKenna would talk about this too. You're often like, what's behind all of this? Come on, show me. Let's see. Show yourself. Like the Wizard of Oz. And then it begins to, and you can't handle it. I couldn't handle it. It was as if the stage was set and the spotlights run, and it's just like, here we go. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not ready. Just the face side profile is fine. Thank you very much. As the trip was waning and we were saying goodbye, I felt a sense of kinship with her and gratitude. That this was, I was coming at this from the limited standpoint and framework of my lifetime, my narrative, my existence, this life, as opposed to many lifetimes, a whole universe of experience. And I asked her, why is it that female mantises bite the heads off the men while they're having sex? And cover your ears if you don't want to hear the swear. But she said, it's because they fuck better. And I sensed that was a wicked sense of humor. And actually I looked it up, and there's a modicum of truth to that, because it's like a second brain takes over in the male mantis's nether regions. I've often felt that my nether regions acted as a second brain. It's like a second brain takes over, and he does last longer. So I'm not saying it justifies murder, but there's a utility to it. So what do we make of all of this? I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. These experiences are different for everybody, and it could be a means of going inward and associating with all the lives we've had or existence as we understand it. Or it could just be a bunch of things that you see like a fever dream, and you're forced to try to connect the dots, as we often do in our daily lives. Sometimes when there's nothing there, like a conspiracy theory that goes nowhere. You're just trying to connect the dots and fulfill a confirmation bias. I would argue that the psilocybin is not a confirmation bias because it's so counterintuitive. I saw a lot of things I didn't want to see. I was told a lot of things I didn't want to hear that I still don't know what to do with. But the notion of a feminine entity being supreme brings a lot of things to my mind that I would wish to unpack. I don't know if this will be remotely as interesting as exploring the psilocybin itself, subject matter. But many female gods have been worshipped throughout time in mythology, known as Gaia, many other types of gods, and that has been taken over by the notion of a man, which undermines women. You call women women, it undermines them by making them an extension of men. It's all in how life affects us. You could say that's just the way things are. We need to classify things a certain way. Whatever. I can't argue with that. I realize this is all very complicated, and life is very difficult. What I do know is that the Christian right played their hand very recently when they overturned Roe versus Wade, and they issued consequences solely against women but not against men. This was not an issue of morality. It was not to appease Christ. It's to control women. Otherwise, a man could also go to the electric chair, potentially. I don't know that anyone was going to follow through on that, but a man would be threatened with the electric chair for impregnating a woman who got an abortion, or walking away, or not holding himself responsible for that life. Men have no responsibility in an abortion, and there are no consequences. So it's not about morality, it's not about curbing immoral behavior, it's about controlling women. And when you do that, when you play your hand like that, you reduce women to the status of property. So if we're all worshiping a male god, which who knows what's out there? Who knows? I don't know. I'm not saying I know. But when you put this forth in society and try to say, this is how it is, and this is what you are. And I feel very conflicted about all this because some of the worst human beings I've ever met were women. Deceitful, deceptive, duplicitous, downright evil. I've met some horrible, horrible women. Horrible, horrible people who were women. I have. Oh, and this is also what's interesting too, is that the Mantis told me that those who had the most supreme connection with her power were women. but that she wasn't that impressed with them. She's not that impressed with you human women. And I was very surprised by this. And I asked her why, and she said, they're spending too much time worrying about their vessels and not enough time worrying about their souls. And I thought about this preponderance of plastic surgery that exists in Western culture in this day and age, whereby a woman does not feel as though she has the permission to grow old. And she feels so insecure about it that she has to go get her face all screwed up. And I remember telling my girlfriend at the time, she went around behind my back for 6 months and got Botox because she knew I would try to talk her out of it, because it's like age. It's your right. I mean, I want to grow. If we're growing old together, I want to grow old with you. And I told her, that stuff can so easily get out of hand. Don't ever put me in a position where I have to look for you behind your own face. Because so many women, beautiful, talented, strong women, are going in under the knife, and then they look like these mannequin facsimiles of themselves, and they're just not attractive anymore. They look kind of sad and scary. It's like they're wearing a mask. So I don't feel it's empowering. I feel it's another means by which women feel they can't be themselves and they don't have permission to exist. They have to try to fix themselves. They often say that men look attractive as they grow older. I'm like, it's just we don't care. We own it because we got better things to do than dye our hair and try to go in under the knife. And a lot of men who have gotten plastic surgery don't look like themselves, don't look so good. So that was interesting. The Mantis was not all that impressed, said work more on your souls. This is a soul game, not a vessel game. I believe taking care of yourself is a way to feed the soul. It got me thinking about the notion of suicide. And I talked this over with a very good friend of mine, Mr. Kevin Golden. We had a band together some years ago called Beaten by Uri. Check it out. It's groovy music. But he's a brilliant guy. We were talking about how heavily stigmatized suicide is. Suicidal ideation in particular. That if you have this bad night and you want to kill yourself, feel like you can't tell anybody about it because they're going to look down on you, they're going to want to call the cops, they're going to want to issue you away into a psych ward. And this is all kind of... sorry, computer keeps cutting out of me. This is all kind of not helpful. We all have road rage, and we all have murderous fantasies, lecherous, erotic fantasies about other people, and by not acting upon them, even though the Bible would tell you that it's just as bad, we all know that's BS. Ask the person who you didn't kill what they would prefer. And they'd be like, yeah, thanks for just thinking about it. I mean, that doesn't seem, not flattered by that, but I'm really glad you didn't kill me, for real. Or you thought about having sex with that person behind my back, but you didn't. That's kind of rough that you thought about it, but I'm really glad you didn't. That is the distinction between morality and immorality. So if you have these erotic thoughts or like thoughts about hurting others, killing others, when you're really full with rage, if I could just get rid of all of these whatever, you're going to feel that way about yourself once in a while, don't you think? You're going to feel that way about the person you can never escape on a 24/7 basis. But I was trying to parlay that against my experiences with the Mantis. And it got into this territory where I thought, if you're a soul and you're collecting information, and the vessel is the means by which you can do it, presumably to work our way and upgrade our way to a vessel which can encompass and protect all souls simultaneously. Not just one, but all. And hope maybe that was inside maybe that's the Soul Colosseum. Maybe that's the dome-like structure that encompasses all souls so they can finally exist at peace. I honestly don't know. But if we're here to collect information, and we don't do everything in our power to do so, and we end our lives on our own terms through suicide, then that seems like a disservice to the soul itself, to the narrative, to the information, to the task at hand, the journey. Again, I don't know what to make out of any of this. These are just some conclusions I ran into. This is the kind of stuff that it's, who the hell am I going to talk to any of this about? But I've reached a point in my life where, I'm getting older, kind of fed up, don't really feel like I have that much more to lose. So I might as well just say what's really going on and be honest with you. I don't think I can be more honest with you just honest than how I've been about what I saw, what my takeaway was. So if you encounter such a being, engage in conversation. And, don't recoil in fear like you're seeing, a little bug. I mean, these bugs were predecessors to us, and they'll be here after us. They got the leg up on us. In many ways, they're certainly more fit for survival and existence than human beings. The bugs, the ones we look down on and stomp on and scream and go eek and squish and want them out of our house. It's like, these are our predecessors. They were here long before us. They have ways of seeing the world. Their vision alone encompasses a field that we can only begin to fathom. Their hearing, their way of sensing their surroundings. It strikes me as a very bitter and cold dog-eat-dog existence, but nevertheless, if they've been here long before us and will be here long after, it seems like they know something we don't. So if you encounter one within one of these journeys, do not resist and engage in conversation and be open to the response. And I hope we can all achieve that in our lives. And I wish you well as you continue onward. And, rock and roll. All right. Nighty-night.